Tonight, dark money. FBI exposes Russian mob's $407 million federal corruption network.
At 5:33 a.m., federal agents moved across Miami, Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles simultaneously. Tactical teams hit 47 locations. The operation involved over 420 FBI agents, supported by IRSCI investigators, DEA task forces, and coordinated through the Justice Department's Organized Crime Strike Force. What they uncovered that morning would expose one of the largest Russian organized crime networks ever documented operating inside the American financial system. Not street-level criminals. Not independent operators. This was a sophisticated Russian mafia infrastructure operating so quietly, so expertly hidden behind legitimate banks, real estate firms, and investment companies, that it had been laundering approximately $340 million per month directly through American financial institutions without triggering federal alerts for nearly 6 years. The first target was Meridian Capital Group. At 5:33 a.m., the main Miami office on Brickell Avenue looked secure.
Fortress-like, professional, marble floors,
glass walls with frosted logos. The kind of place that handled billions in legitimate transactions daily. But FBI surveillance teams had been watching for 8 months. They knew that the office closed to clients at 6 p.m., but the executive suites never went dark. Lights stayed on the 42nd floor. New people arrived through the executive garage entrance. Different security protocols.
different delivery patterns.
The humidity hung thick over Miami that morning.
Pre-dawn warmth.
The street was empty except for a few early delivery trucks and the sound of distant traffic on I-95.
Then silence. Complete silence.
The kind of silence that happens 30 seconds before something breaks. At exactly 5:33 a.m., FBI agents in tactical gear hit the main entrance and the underground parking garage simultaneously. Flashbangs detonated. The glass doors of Meridian Capital exploded inward. 32 agents moved through the lobby in synchronized formation, weapons raised, voices shouting commands in English and Russian. The main trading floor was empty. Rows of darkened monitors.
Abandoned workstations.
A photograph of Moscow on the wall behind the reception desk.
Then they went upstairs.
The executive suite door on the 42nd floor was reinforced steel, disguised with elegant wooden paneling. Agents breached it with specialized equipment. The door gave way. Above, behind encrypted servers hidden inside what appeared to be legitimate trading infrastructure, agents found something that made the lead investigator, Special Agent Victoria Reeves of the FBI's Organized Crime Division, pause before speaking into her radio.
We have the core servers.
Full financial routing system, cryptocurrency conversion equipment, wire transfer logs documenting approximately $2.1 billion in transactions over 72 months. Simultaneously, across the country, the same scene was repeating. At a boutique investment firm in Chicago, FBI agents were finding shell company documentation, bearer bonds, and proof of securities fraud involving $340 million in stolen pension funds. At a real estate development company in New York, federal agents discovered hidden rooms containing physical ledgers written in Russian, documenting loan sharking operations and extortion payments from construction companies across the Northeast. At a jewelry exchange in Los Angeles, agents found encrypted communication devices, cryptocurrency mining equipment, and evidence of money laundering operations connected to international arms trafficking. But the most shocking discovery came at a penthouse apartment in Manhattan. This was a command center.
34th floor.
Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Federal agents breached the main entrance with precision. Inside, they found something that would change the entire direction of the investigation. In a climate-controlled office hidden behind a false wall, agents discovered what appeared to be the central command hub of the entire operation.
Multiple servers.
Secure communication arrays. Digital maps of the United States covered in red and blue markers indicating money flows and distribution networks. But more importantly, agents found something that would take them far beyond simple money laundering. They found sealed file boxes containing what appeared to be government documents.
Official letterheads.
Congressional correspondence. Encrypted hard drives. And a master ledger that listed names.
Dozens of names.
Some were known Russian mob associates. But others were different. Some had titles next to them.
Federal title. Political positions. Judicial titles.
As boxes were being loaded into federal vehicles, one agent found a folder labeled Operation Troika. Inside were photographs, surveillance images of meetings, and a list of protected financial corridors, specific banking channels and wire routing systems where money would move without regulatory scrutiny or federal investigation. This changed everything. 22 hours after the initial raids, agents moved their findings to the FBI Cyber Forensics Division in Washington, D.C. The task was massive.
Decrypt the servers.
Crack the financial encryption. Build the network map. Identify every participant. By 3:47 a.m., analysts had their first breakthrough. The servers weren't just tracking money laundering, they were tracking everything. Bribes paid to federal judges, payments made to U.S. senators, offshore accounts established for congressional staffers, protection money paid to FBI field office supervisors, political campaign donations funneled through shell companies, blackmail materials cataloged and cross-referenced by target name. But the network went deeper. The financial analysis revealed what federal investigators called institutional penetration. The Russian mafia hadn't just hidden their money, they had embedded themselves inside American financial infrastructure. Banks with legitimate charters, First Liberty Capital, United Commerce Holdings, Atlantic Financial Services, Global Bridge Banking. These institutions had federal licenses. They had regulatory approval.
They had clean audits.
They were designed to be real because they were designed by people who understood exactly how to pass federal inspection. The money was laundered through real estate purchases, casino transactions, art gallery sales, high-end restaurant acquisitions, and luxury auto dealerships spread across 12 states. Federal financial analysts traced $2.04 billion moving through these channels over 48 months. The operation was extracting approximately $42.5 million per month in pure profit from the United States market, money that was being sent back to Russia through cryptocurrency exchanges, structured wire transfers hidden in legitimate business invoices, and gold smuggling operations that moved value out through the same banking networks that brought money in. But the real shock came when analysts cracked the encryption on the main command server. Inside were organizational charts.
Detailed ones.
The operation had structure. It had a hierarchy. There was a banking director responsible for financial flows, a security chief coordinating protection and intimidation, a political affairs manager overseeing government relationships. But above all of them, marked only as the PAC-HON, was a single contact list entry, one encrypted identifier, one name hidden in a secure partition that took analysts 6 hours to decrypt. PAC-HON Senator Richard Holloway. The name meant something immediately. Analysts ran it through databases. Senator Richard Holloway was a United States Senator from Florida.
20-year incumbent.
Ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. A man with direct authority over federal financial regulations. A man with access to classified intelligence briefings. A man with the power to shape federal banking policy. As agents dug deeper, they found something that made the entire investigation shift into a different category of severity entirely. There were internal emails, encrypted messages, bank account records, communications between the PAC-HON and operations managers discussing specific dates when federal audits would be delayed, when banking inspectors would receive early warnings before regulatory visits, when congressional oversight hearings would be mysteriously postponed, when IRS investigations would be mysteriously closed. This wasn't corruption in the traditional sense. This wasn't a few officials taking bribes. This was orchestrated. This was engineered. This was a criminal organization that had built a shadow infrastructure inside America's financial regulatory system. The FBI lead investigator, Special Agent Reeves, stood in the Federal Operations Center at 7:15 a.m., looking at the digital financial network map projected on a 50-foot screen. Red lines connected the mob's various banking nodes. Blue lines showed money flows. Green lines showed regulatory bypass routes. The entire financial system was lit up like a circuit board designed to move criminal money. "This isn't infiltration," Reeves said quietly to the assembled task force. "This is architecture." They didn't compromise individual institutions. They built parallel financial institutions. And they used federal authority to protect them. The realization was chilling. The Russian mob didn't just hide inside financial regulation. They had created a second financial regulatory structure, one that actively protected criminal money flows instead of stopping them. By this point, federal oversight at the highest levels of the Justice Department had escalated the investigation to the highest priority. The scope was now nationwide. The implications were structural. What investigators discovered over the next 48 hours was that Operation Troika wasn't just a Miami problem. The network extended across 18 states. The banking architecture was designed to move criminal money efficiently across the entire United States while using Florida as the primary hub. From Russian oligarchs, cryptocurrency transfers brought approximately $180 million monthly into exchanges controlled by the mob's banking network. This was mixed with money from international arms trafficking, human trafficking, and extortion operations across Eastern Europe and the former Soviet states. The mixed funds were then routed through American banks, legitimized through loan documentation, real estate purchases, and fictitious business transactions. From there, the laundered money flowed into political campaigns, judicial campaign funds, and federal agency budgets disguised as legitimate consulting contracts. The scale was industrial. Investigators estimated that Operation Troika was capable of moving approximately $340 million per month through American financial institutions without triggering federal alerts. $340 million.
Per month.
That's enough money to influence federal policy, to compromise institutions, to corrupt officials systematically. And it was happening quietly.
Methodically. Protected.
The human trafficking component was even more disturbing. The network used legitimate visa fraud and fake business immigration as cover. Eastern European women paid thousands of dollars to cartel-controlled trafficking operations that promised them jobs in America. But once they arrived, the network enslaved them, forced them into prostitution rings operating out of massage parlors and nightclubs owned by shell companies connected to the Russian mob. Hundreds of human beings transformed into profit centers for organized crime. One frozen forensic file, recovered from the seized servers, contained a strategic plan. It was labeled Phase 5 Consolidation. Inside were projections,
Political influence models. Expansion plans.
The document outlined how the Russian mafia intended to deepen its presence in federal agencies, the judiciary, and Congress over the next 4 years. The goal was explicit. The mob would have secured enough influence in the Senate Banking Committee, the Federal Reserve Board, and the Justice Department to make federal financial regulations structurally impossible to enforce against them. This wasn't just a money laundering organization anymore. This was an attempt at systemic capture. A criminal syndicate trying to engineer permanent control over American financial infrastructure. At 6:15 a.m., federal operations shifted into a new phase. The coordinated takedown would begin. The operations center was in Washington, D.C., inside the FBI's headquarters. 3 stories underground. Massive digital displays.
Satellite feeds.
Real-time financial tracking systems. Over 1,400 federal agents from the FBI, IRSCI, DEA, Secret Service, and specialized units from the Navy's Criminal Investigative Service were coordinated through this command center.
42 SWAT teams.
6 FBI helicopters staged at multiple locations for rapid deployment. Coast Guard coordination for suspected seaborne money movements. Federal marshals positioned at major financial institutions to prevent evidence destruction. The target list was immense. 123 simultaneous raids were scheduled across Florida, New York, Illinois, California, Nevada, and 8 additional states. Each location was a mob node. Each one was hit at precisely the same moment, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. In the financial district of Miami, federal agents raided a private banking office hidden inside a high-rise tower. The office appeared like any other wealth management firm. Leather furniture, prestigious certifications on the walls, photographs of clients receiving awards. But inside a hidden vault behind the main conference room, agents found documentation for 247 shell companies, each one used to launder money. They found ledgers documenting $1.2 billion in transactions over 48 months.
They found names, dozens of names.
Federal judges, congressional representatives, FBI officials, all receiving regular payments. Simultaneously, in the financial district of Chicago, FBI and IRS agents raided a currency exchange operation. The facility appeared ordinary: exchange booths, surveillance cameras, security guards. But in the back offices, hidden behind encrypted security doors, agents found something extraordinary. A cryptocurrency mining operation capable of converting stolen digital assets into legitimate currency.
Equipment seized. Operations shut down.
Evidence documented that approximately $89 million in cryptocurrency had been laundered through this single facility over 36 months. In Manhattan, at a boutique investment firm, federal agents found something that demonstrated the scale of the operation. 47 separate trading accounts, each one disguised under legitimate client names, were actually controlled by Russian mob associates. Laboratory analysis of transaction records revealed that approximately $340 million had moved through these accounts. Money from illegal sources being transformed into legitimate investments, real estate purchases, and political campaign contributions. At a port facility in Newark, FBI and Coast Guard agents discovered a smuggling operation connected to the money laundering network. Physical gold bars, approximately 12,400 kilograms, were being shipped to Russia aboard cargo vessels registered in Cyprus and Malta. The gold represented approximately $620 million in value. It was being sold as scrap or industrial material on shipping manifests. In reality, it was converted value, money that had been laundered through American banks, converted to gold, and exported to fund Russian operations and line oligarch pockets. At a luxury real estate development in Boca Raton, federal agents discovered what amounted to a money laundering depot. The development, a beachfront condominium tower, had been financed entirely through mob-connected banks. Property records revealed that approximately 340 individual units had been purchased by shell companies connected to the Russian mafia, each one purchased at inflated prices using laundered money. Real estate and money laundering were operating as a single system. In 18 hours, federal agents had seized the following: $127.4 million in U.S. currency, An additional $340.2 million seized from financial accounts, cryptocurrency exchanges, and gold holdings. 43 cartel operational leaders were arrested. Dozens of lower-level operatives were detained. 63 firearms were recovered, along with documentation of international weapons trafficking operations. But the most significant seizures were the digital ones. 87 computers, servers, and encrypted devices were taken into federal custody. These devices contained the entire operational blueprint of the network.
The money flows, the routing, the payments, the names,
The blackmail materials.
everything.
By 1 p.m., the Russian mafia's American financial infrastructure had taken more damage in 18 hours than in the previous 18 years of federal law enforcement action against international organized crime. What came next was perhaps the most painful part of the investigation for honest law enforcement and government officials. The forensic analysis of seized servers and communications revealed the extent of the internal corruption. FBI officials, working with the Justice Department's Inspector General, began cross-referencing communications found on mob servers with federal personnel records, salary information, and office location data from multiple agencies. The pattern became immediately clear. 51 federal officials across 8 agencies had active communications with Russian mob operatives.
51.
Some were low-level, administrative staff who would receive coded messages warning them about upcoming audits or investigations. Others were more senior. An IRS regional director had coordinated with mob associates to ensure that tax audits of mob-connected businesses were mysteriously closed or indefinitely postponed. A federal judge had issued rulings favorable to mob money laundering defendants, with communications revealing that the judge received regular payments disguised as consulting fees. But the most damaging discovery involved the FBI field office in Miami. 12 agents and supervisors, including an assistant special agent in charge, had been actively working for the Russian mafia. Not passively accepting bribes. Not looking the other way. Actually working. Actively providing advance notice of planned federal investigations. Providing access to classified databases containing financial investigation data. Coordinating with mob security personnel to intimidate witnesses and prevent federal prosecutions. One internal investigation discovered that an FBI supervisor had personally met with Russian mob operatives, providing them with copies of wiretap applications before they were even filed with judges. Federal agents conducted internal raids on FBI field offices, IRS regional offices, and federal courthouse buildings across the country. 51 federal officials were arrested. Badges were stripped. Security clearances were revoked. Weapons were seized. Officials who had sworn oaths to uphold the Constitution had instead become extensions of a criminal organization. What made this worse, what made this truly devastating to the agencies watching the investigation unfold, was the realization that this had been happening for 6 years without detection. These officials had attended security briefings. They had been trusted with classified information. They had been responsible for investigating the very crimes they were committing. And all the while, they had been systematically betraying their agencies and the American public. One FBI deputy director interviewed after the arrests, who had worked federal law enforcement for 31 years, was visibly shaken. "You build your career on the belief that the system protects itself," she said. "You believe that internal checks work. You believe that bad actors get caught. And then you discover that the Russian mafia had built its own federal agency inside your agency, and nobody knew." The corruption went beyond just operational support. Financial analysis revealed that the Russian mafia had paid approximately $4.7 million in bribes and salary supplements to these 51 officials over a 6-year period. The payments were made through offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, and wire transfers disguised as legitimate business consulting contracts. Federal officials had been given unexplained bonuses. Some had purchased vacation homes in the Caribbean. Others had sent their children to Ivy League universities. The money trail was obvious in retrospect. Multiple supervisors had noticed unusual financial patterns in personnel records, but those supervisors had then experienced sudden transfers, forced retirement offers, or investigations into their own conduct. The mob had anticipated that honest officials would raise questions, and it had prepared responses, using its influence over senior leadership to silence internal accountability mechanisms before they could function. But the most shocking discovery was still to come, and it involved Senator Richard Holloway directly. Federal investigators, now with full prosecutorial authority and warrants signed by federal judges, conducted a raid on Senator Holloway's residence in Alexandria, Virginia, at 8 a.m. This wasn't a scene of dramatic tactical action. There were no flashbangs. There was no violent resistance. Instead, federal agents in business attire arrived with sealed warrants and escorted Senator Holloway into custody with minimal resistance.
He appeared shocked, unprepared.
Almost as if he didn't believe that federal authority could reach a sitting United States senator. Inside the senator's home, federal agents found a hidden office on the 3rd floor, concealed behind a false wall in what appeared to be a library. Inside this office, agents discovered encrypted communication devices, phones and laptops that connected only to Russian mob networks. More importantly, they found physical evidence. Documents bearing the senator's signature authorizing specific federal actions. Not authorizing investigations or enforcement against the mob. Authorizing delays in federal banking investigations targeting mob-connected institutions. Authorizing the appointment of mob-friendly judges to federal courts. Authorizing the placement of mob-connected attorneys into the Justice Department. The documents were dated and signed. They created a clear paper trail showing that the senator had been actively directing federal resources to protect Russian mob operations and facilitate money laundering. Federal investigators discovered that the senator had been compromised by the Russian mafia approximately 8 years earlier, before he had even been elected to the Senate Banking Committee. The mob had identified him as a rising political figure with significant campaign debts. They had provided financial support to his campaign through shell companies and fake donations. They had assisted his election and re-election. And then, once he was in a position of power, they had collected on that investment. The senator had resisted initially, according to encrypted communications recovered from the servers. He had refused to cooperate, but the mob had leverage. They had evidence of illegal campaign finance violations. They had recordings of meetings with mob associates. They had detailed financial records. And most importantly, they had blackmail materials, compromising photographs and recordings involving the senator's adult son. By the time the federal investigation reached him, the senator had become a willing participant. He had rationalized his cooperation. He told himself that the amount of money being laundered was small compared to the total volume of American financial transactions. He told himself that a few officials being compromised was acceptable. He told himself that the arrangement was temporary, that he would eventually find a way to escape it. None of these rationalizations changed the fundamental reality. A United States senator, an elected official with a 20-year career in public service, had become a criminal. He had become an asset of the Russian mafia. He had used his position and authority to facilitate the corruption of federal institutions and the destruction of victims through human trafficking and organized crime. While federal prosecutors were building cases against the 51 corrupt federal officials and Senator Richard Holloway, another team of investigators was calculating a different kind of toll. The FBI's Civil Rights Division and the Justice Department's Human Trafficking Task Force partnered with state law enforcement and victim advocacy organizations to trace the human cost of Operation Troika. The investigation was painstaking. Each victim had to be identified. Each trafficking case had to be documented. Each connection to the Russian mob had to be verified. By the end, the numbers were clear. The mob's operation had directly enslaved approximately 1,247 women and girls across the United States over the 6-year operational period. 1,247 human beings sold into slavery. That's approximately 207 people per year being trafficked directly by this single criminal organization. The victims were concentrated in vulnerable populations. Immigrants with uncertain legal status. Women with family members still in Eastern Europe who could be threatened. Girls with substance addiction dependencies that the mob exploited and controlled. The mob had destroyed lives. It had destroyed families. It created systems of slavery. Federal agents, conducting victim liaison work in the days after the raids, encountered the human cost directly. One investigator described meeting a woman from Ukraine who had been trafficked at age 22. She had been told she would work as a nanny in New York. Instead, she had been enslaved in a network of massage parlors and brothels for 4 years. She had been beaten repeatedly. She had been drugged. She had been forced to perform acts she cannot describe. When she finally escaped, jumping from a second-story window of a Brooklyn brothel, she broke both legs. The woman asked the federal agent a simple question: why did nobody stop them before? The agent was honest. Because people in positions of authority were protecting them, he said. We should have caught this years ago. The woman nodded slowly. She had nothing else to say. That conversation repeated dozens of times across the country. Each one represented a failure. Each one represented lives that could have been protected. Each one represented victims who could have been freed years earlier. The immediate takedown phase of Operation Troika was complete. The mob's financial infrastructure was destroyed. The leader was arrested. The money was seized. The victims were being identified and supported. But the real work was just beginning. Federal oversight teams were brought in to systematically review federal operations across all agencies involved. Every major decision made by the 51 corrupt officials was scrutinized. Every investigation they had touched was reviewed for potential compromise. Every case they had worked on was evaluated for legitimacy. Some prosecutions had to be dismissed because corrupt officials had been involved in the evidence chain. Some defendants who had been convicted with evidence gathered or processed by corrupt officials had to be released or retried. The federal justice system itself had been contaminated by corruption, and it would take years to identify and address every point of compromise. Federal agencies affected by the corruption initiated major internal reviews. The FBI commissioned a complete audit of its Miami field office operations, hiring practices, and security protocols. The IRS initiated a comprehensive review of its Financial Investigation Unit. The Justice Department commissioned an external investigation into all federal judge appointments made during the period of the mob's influence. Congressional oversight of the Senate Banking Committee was restructured. Constitutional scholars debated whether Senator Holloway should remain in office pending trial or face immediate expulsion. The question was both legal and political. Allowing him to remain in office while facing federal charges for treason-adjacent crimes was untenable. Expelling him raised questions about due process. In the end, the Senate voted 97-3 to expel Senator Holloway, and a lieutenant governor appointment process was initiated to fill the vacant seat. But the damage remained. Trust in federal institutions had been eroded. Citizens questioned whether their financial systems could be trusted. Communities that had suffered the worst impacts of human trafficking now looked at federal authorities with suspicion, wondering if they could be trusted to prevent future victimization. Some victim advocacy organizations demanded that all officials who supervised the 51 corrupt agents also face discipline. Others demanded that entire federal agencies be restructured. Federal investigators also conducted a comprehensive investigation into the Russian mob's international connections. Communications seized from the servers revealed that Operation Troika was connected to organized crime networks in Russia, Eastern Europe, and Cyprus. The mob was receiving money from international arms trafficking, human trafficking across multiple continents, and corruption of foreign governments. It was sending laundered profits back to Russia and Eastern Europe to fund organized crime operations. It was part of a global criminal empire. The investigation crossed international borders and involved coordination with law enforcement agencies in 17 different countries. Federal indictments had been issued. Senator Richard Holloway faced 52 counts, including racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, human trafficking facilitation, and treason. The 51 corrupt federal officials faced charges ranging from bribery to conspiracy to wire fraud to human trafficking. The 43 identified Russian mob operational leaders faced capital money laundering charges and conspiracy to commit murder. Prosecutors announced that they would seek the maximum penalties available under law. The trials would take years. The appeals would stretch beyond that. But the outcome was already clear. These individuals would spend decades in federal prison. Some would likely die in prison. The immediate seizures totaled $467.6 million in currency and financial assets. Another estimated $680 million in mob assets, real estate, businesses, vehicles, gold, would be seized through civil asset forfeiture proceedings. The total economic damage to the Russian mob infrastructure was estimated at approximately $1.2 billion. But perhaps the most important seizure was less quantifiable. The mob's American financial infrastructure was destroyed. Its command hierarchy was dismantled. Its protected financial corridors were exposed and closed. Its corrupt federal official assets were arrested. Its money laundering networks were shut down. The architecture that had allowed it to move $340 million per month through American institutions was gone. The story of Operation Troika is not unique. Similar operations have been discovered involving different organized crime networks and different forms of corruption. What makes this operation significant is its penetration depth, its financial scale, and its revelation of a fundamental vulnerability in American federal institutions. Organized crime and international criminal networks don't need to conquer the government through violence. They don't need to topple institutions through terrorism. They only need something much simpler.
They need silence. They need ambition.
They need the willingness of individuals in positions of authority to compromise their oaths for money, for protection, or for the illusion of control. Senator Richard Holloway didn't wake up one morning intending to become a Russian mob asset. He was gradually compromised. He was given financial support when he was an ambitious politician with campaign debts. He was given assurances of safety once he was vulnerable. He was given rationalizations to justify his cooperation. And by the time he fully realized what he had become, he was too deeply entangled to escape. The 51 corrupt federal officials followed a similar trajectory. They didn't join the Russian mafia.
The mob came to them.
They were identified as exploitable. They were approached. They were offered money.
They were threatened.
They were gradually drawn into a system of complicity that eventually required them to actively protect money laundering and facilitate human trafficking. The real cost of Operation Troika is not measured in the billions of dollars seized or the financial infrastructure dismantled. The real cost is measured in the 1,247 lives enslaved. The families were separated. The victims were exploited. The institutions were corrupted.
The trust eroded.
But there is a counterpoint to this dark story. There is also the fact that federal agents, honest officials, and federal prosecutors maintained their integrity throughout the investigation. They pursued leads that implicated their own institutions. They arrested their colleagues. They challenged a sitting United States senator. They did this because they understood that the integrity of government depends on accountability, even when, especially when, that accountability is painful and costly.
The lesson is clear.
Power does not require open violence to be destructive. Power only requires silence. Power only requires the willing cooperation of individuals in positions of authority, willing to compromise their oaths for personal gain. And the protection against that kind of power is perpetual vigilance, institutional accountability, and the willingness of honest people to speak against corruption even when it is costly to do so. If you are still watching this story, if you have stayed engaged through this narrative of federal corruption and Russian mob infiltration, please share this story.
Comment below.
Make it clear that you want corruption exposed. Make it clear that you understand the stakes. Make it clear that silence is complicity.
This story is fictional, a dramatization.
But the vulnerabilities it describes are real. The tactics it documents are observed in actual organized crime investigations. The only thing that stands between functional democracy and organized crime control is constant vigilance, strong institutions, and the willingness of people to demand accountability. Remember this story. Remember Operation Troika. Remember that the badge and the office only mean something if the people holding them choose to make them mean something.